Good evening, Father. Father, shall we begin?
No, we'll wait for some time.
Okay. Good evening, ma'am. Cheryl Davis.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Nice to meet you.
Same here. How are you?
Yeah, fine, fine.
Okay.
A warm good evening to all of you present here. Welcome to day 2 session of International Webinar Series Body as a Matrix of Resistance, organized by Department of English, Pavanatma College, Murikeshwari. We are happy to have received the wholehearted participation of all of you present here. It's a great pleasure to have the presence of Dr. Cheryl Davis, Assistant Professor, Department of English, St. Joseph's College, Tiruchirappalli. Now, may I take this opportunity to invite Reverend Father Dr. Tony Thomas to introduce ma'am. Father Thomas.
Respected Master of the College, Monsignor Reverend Father Jos Machigal, Principal Dr. Johnson, Bursar Father J.S. Matton, Head of the Department of English, Sister Jolie K.V., faculties from other colleges, scholars, participants, and my dear colleagues. A very good evening to all. On the second day of this international webinar series on Body as a Matrix of Resistance, we have with us Dr. Cheryl Davis, Assistant Professor, Department of English, St. Joseph College, Autonomous, Tiruchi, Tamil Nadu. I am extremely delighted to introduce her. She has 10 years of teaching experience at St. Joseph's College. Her areas of interest are post-colonial literature, literary criticism and theory, and eco-criticism. She has published more than 20 research articles, presented more than 25 research papers. She also has completed a minor UGC research project on magical realism in the world of cartoons, its imperial influence in exploiting a child's psyche, a behavior, and growth. As a research advisor to her research scholars, she is a good friend, best mentor, and an excellent, approachable research guide. Already she has produced 5 PhD candidates, and at present, 5 scholars are pursuing their PhD under her guidance. Today, we are very privileged to have her presence for this international webinar. With this note, I request Dr. Cheryl ma'am to take over this session. Please, ma'am. Ma'am, you are not audible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Father, for that warm welcome. I think I'm seeing you after a long time, and it's nice to see you.
Thank you.
Okay, and all the other professors also. And before I begin my topic, I would like to thank the organizers of this webinar, international webinar, the head of the department, the management, the principal, for giving me this opportunity to present, to be a resource person over here. Okay, so I shall begin my topic. Shall I present my slide, Father?
Yeah, surely, ma'am.
Is the slide clear, visible?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. It's
Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone who have come over here for this webinar, international webinar, and it's supposed to be a 3 days adventure for you, which is going to be enlightening and also a great entertainment for you in the educational scenario. And once again, I thank Father Tony and the management for giving me this opportunity. When father approached me and told me about the topic of, am I audible?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Audible.
Okay. When father approached me and told me about the topic on the seminar, on this webinar, the body as a matrix of resistance, the topic that I have chosen is resistance in literature, a tool for the voice of the voiceless. Okay. And I have not gone very much deep into the topic because he told me the level of students. Okay. And I have just touched upon the main theme of the webinar. Okay. The very title, Resistance in Literature. And I have added a subtitle also as a tool for the voice of the voiceless. Okay. Now, resistance you find in literature. There is always a resistance in literature. If there is a protagonist, surely there has to be an antagonist. Then only the story will move. Okay. But there are various reasons why people resist. Okay. And why is this concept resistance brought into literature? Okay. And why is it used as a tool? Now, the very title, voice of the voiceless. There may be many people who are not able to voice themselves. You may be feeling some kind of an anxiety or some kind of a fear that they are not able to voice themselves. So they at the background there is some voice who will try to bring out their struggle. Okay, that is why you have this title I have chosen, resistance in literature, a tool for the voice of the voiceless. Okay. Now, how I am going to speak on this topic is, I will just tell you what is resistance all about and how did it emerge in literature. What are the areas you can analyze, okay, in resistance literature? And I have given you some examples of some works of art. So this is what all my topic is going to be, and I hope it will be useful to you. Okay. And now, as usual, okay, when you go into a topic, the introduction of a topic, this word resistance, when you just remove the literary form and when you just look at the word resistance, okay, so what is the word resistance? And you look up it at any dictionary, you will see this meaning, okay, dislike or opposition to a plan, an idea, refusal to obey, a refusal to accept, or refusal to comply with something, okay. So this is what the definition Oxford Dictionary or any dictionary that matters gives you. Before I go into the literary aspect, I think most of you, I don't know whether it has come out in Malayalam or what, you have seen the movie Pink, okay, where you have Amitabh Bachchan playing the male role, or in Tamil, where you have this name Nerkonda Parvai in Tamil, acted by Ajit Kumar. Now that is a courtroom drama, okay, a courtroom drama, and you find the movie moves like where you have women there. I think most of you would have watched the movie, the courtroom drama, where the women are, forced into trying to have an affair with men, and the women try to resist, and that is the verdict in the courtroom drama. When the women resist, when they say no, then it has to be accepted. So to make it very simple, when you say resistance, it means no. Okay, no to something which you dislike, you disobey, or you feel it is not suitable to your way of life. Okay, it can be anything. It can be something personal. It can be private. It can be society oriented. It can be governmental oriented. So any aspect where you resist to something. Okay. Now this term in literature. Okay. So we all know where the definition of literature goes as literature is a reflection of life or society. So you have a writer and you have a work of art. Okay. Now the writer here, it may be the concept in which he writes may be subjective or objective. So subjective means maybe out of his own personal experience he writes. But if it's going to be objective, then he hears a matter outside. Okay, some concept he overhears and he writes. For example, during the 18th century, you would have heard of these coffee houses and the gossips and mannerisms of the aristocratic people, where these people used to go to the coffee houses, visit the coffee houses, and whatever information they get over there, they used to write. Okay, so when you say literature, it reflects something about life. So it may reflect any aspect in the society. For example, it can be political, it can be historical, it can be economical, it can be religious, it can be educational, or any form of administration. Okay. So, for instance, many writers try to put forward their issues in front of the society through their writings. Okay. And as the saying goes, we have already read, know this quotation, the pen is mightier than the sword. Okay, so more than the sword, the pen is very powerful. You find most of the the magazines, the newspapers, okay, the media, which tries to focus more, which is more powerful. And now we move on almost to the 21st century, where we have this technology oriented of these apps coming up, like Facebook and WhatsApp and the statuses. And any issues, you find people giving their likes or their dislikes, and they try to give their comments over it. Okay, so this all is one kind of resistance. Okay, so overall, resistance were brought into literature is to resist something, some issues in the society, which writers tend to write upon it. Okay, and so they become the voice for those people who are not able to voice out. Okay, so this is the introduction part of what is resistance and how is this word resistance used in literature. Okay, now the term resistance is always present in literature as a backdrop. Okay, you did not call it, no, this novel is a resistance novel, or this novel is a feminist novel, or this novel is a nature novel. Okay, every work of art has a resistance, every work of art has nature as a background, every work of art has women as a background. For example, you look at most of Shakespeare's plays. Most of Shakespeare's plays, we say male domination, but actually, most of Shakespeare's plays, you have women playing the major role. Okay, without women, there is no story in Shakespeare's plays. Okay, so we look at a work of art, we try to analyze it, we read it, and then we come to know about the concept of this resistance. Okay, now writers who were dissatisfied by the system, they try to rebel or revolt against them. So those writers who felt, okay, such issues were something which is tormenting or torturing the people, or even personally, so they started rebelling back through literature. So through their writings, they either try to satire the society, either indirectly, or the issues related to it in front of the society or the government bodies. So earlier it was called as protest literature. Then we had the term resistance literature, and now we use the term resistance literature. Okay, so earlier you had this concept of how these terms varied and how these terms changed. Okay, so what is resistance literature? Okay, so it is a form of some political resistance which we find throughout history. Okay, so it is a political resistance. Now, usually we say, no, there is some politics. Okay, we say there is some issues, there is some politics, meaning you are not able to accept that. Okay, so resistance literature means a kind of a political resistance. Okay, you are resisting, not to a family, you are not resisting to your siblings, or you're not resisting. So there are resistance. You have conflict within your family, but that and all cannot be called as a resistance. Your resistance is on a bigger hierarchy, where you try to resistance certain norms, a certain culture, certain tradition, certain rights. Okay, so this is what is called all of. That's why it is framed as a kind of a political resistance. You resist with your mom, you resist with your dad, you resist in a family, but that is just a minor change. Okay, later on you gather together. Okay, but here it is something severe where people almost resist. Okay, in order to break certain rules or chains. Okay, so this resistance, you find it in fiction, you find it in cinema, you find it in drama, you find it in poetry, in visual arts, in music. So these are the areas where you find. So, what is the purpose of resistance literature is to resist an oppression or any oppressive system in a creative manner. Creative manner, that is literature. Okay, people start writing about it in a creative manner, but it with the backdrop of some resistance towards an oppression. Okay, they are oppressed, they are marginalized. Okay, so they try to resist it. So thus, resistant literature has become the tool of the powerless to protest against an aggressor or a rebellion. Okay, so it is used as a weapon, it is used as a tool for all those people who are powerless, who are voiceless. It is used as a tool. Okay, so oppression and resistance are the two poles, or you say the major aspects of resistance literature. So when you analyze a work of art, surely you should find these two concepts. Okay, so there should be some oppression, there should be someone who is dominated, someone who is marginalized for them to resist it. Okay, so what is the purpose of their resisting? Okay, so some oppression where they feel and then they resist. So you have in many areas like injustice, colonialism, gender differences, dictatorial regimes like you have Hitler, all these things, totalitarianism, abuse of power, and ethnicity. So these are some of the areas where you find this concept of resistance literature. Okay. Now, as I told you, okay, resistance literature was already there. Resistance was already there, okay. But this term had been emerged recently, okay. And actually, they say it started in America. This term. Why America or why the U.S.? It is because of the Africans, okay, the Afro Americans or the Africans who started fighting for their rights. Now, the Africans resisting is because of their color. Okay, you know, wherever an African goes, he is made known, wherever he stands in a group or anything, he is made known by his color. By his color, we know that he is an African or an Afro. So that was the main problem which these Afro Americans faced. So that is why when they started suffering under America, or they were put down by the Americans, you know, they were not able to. The children were not able to study in American schools, the white schools, and you know, they were not able to go to the white restaurant to eat, and they had to stay in a separate community like the Harlem. All those things. Okay, so they were not allowed. They were all called Negro artists. They were not allowed to be with the white men. So they started rebelling, they started resisting. So first, the tool which they used was poetry, newspapers, and songs, and they formed a movement, okay, which was called as the abolitionist movement. And when they started writing, those writings were called as slave narratives. So you see, even they are put down, okay, they are called as slave narratives. So what is this slave narrative all about? It is a type of literary genre involving the autobiographical accounts of enslaved Africans from America. So it is not just a kind of an objective writing, but it is all subjective writing, subject to their own personal experience. And the writers who were undergoing, the people who were undergoing their personal experience, and it's all autobiographical accounts which they started writing back, rebelling back, okay, and it documented and spoke about their first-hand experience of being enslaved. So how they were treated, how they were treated as slaves. So they started writing back, okay, writing back to the white rule or writing back to the foreign rule. Okay, so that's why this term, even though it was already there, but they say that this term actually originated from America. Okay. Now this the coining of this term, we say protest literature, we say resistance in literature. But how did we come to this term, resistance literature? Who was the one, like we say, no, the post-colonialism, post-modernism, okay, all those terms. Okay, so who coined this term, resistance literature? And there was a critic by name Barbara Harlow in 1987. Okay, so she was the one who wrote an essay coining this term, resistance literature. So that is why we try to analyze this concept through Barbara Harlow's works. Just few points on Barbara Harlow. She was a champion of human rights and justice issues. She was a scholar and teacher who bridged many genres and disciplines. She was remembered as a brilliant, influential critic, activist, and a teacher. And she passed away recently, that is on 28 January 2017. Okay. And now, where does Barbara Harlow get this term resistance literature? And she has cited this term from Gaston Kanajani's work, Liberation of Resistance. And he is a Palestine author. And since he started supporting these Palestinians, he was assassinated. So his work, Literature of Resistance in an Occupied Palestine from 1948 to 66. So Barbara Harlow takes this term, resistance literature, from Gaston Kanajani's work, and it talks about the resistance of colonialism and its successors. Now, I'm not going to tell you the full aspect of what Barbara Harlow talks about resistance literature, but just few points which she has mentioned in that particular essay. It examines the fiction, that is resistance literature, okay? Examines the fiction produced during the national liberation struggle in the global world. So these people who were struggling, they formed a liberation movement and they started writing back. Okay, so that is why it is called as resistance literature. And this was a new conception of political resistance, talking about the struggles and the defense of the oppressed and the marginalized. So, all those people who underwent this oppression and marginalization, so these people suffered a lot. Okay, a few more points on Barbara Harlow's essay. She says it's a wide ranging and impressive critical study of literatures of the contemporary Third World Liberation Movement as they confront and alter the literary and political categories of the West. So, third world country, usually we know, okay, the first world country talks about US, the second world talks about the Soviet, and the third world countries are those countries who try to neither join with the first world or the second world. So they try to be a little different, okay? They try to be independent, and how they struggled as an independent country in all aspects, okay, in economical, in social, in political, and they used to rebel against the Western countries. Resistant literature not only analyzes the literary text, but it also informs about the urgent political and cultural debates. Okay, so the discussions people used to have. That's why I said earlier, just like the coffee houses where people used to have a discussion. So here also the discussions people had, okay, about their struggles and how they were marginalized or how they were put down. And from those debates, they started writing. From those movements, liberation movements, they started writing back. So overall, resistance literature talks about a collective struggle. So it's not just one person's struggle; it's a community struggling. Okay, it's a whole country struggling. Okay, it's not an individual struggling. So a collective struggle of people to seize control of their lives, to get back the freedom of their lives. So this is what Barbara Harlow talks about resistance literature in her critical essay. She has talked about many points, but I have just highlighted only on few points. Okay, fine. Okay. So now I have already given you a picture of what is resistance literature all about, and also about the critic. Okay, Barbara Harlow, what does she say about resistance literature? Now, what are the literary areas where you can analyze this resistance literature? Okay, and I already told you, resistance literature, you have already find it as a backdrop in many works. But what are the areas you can analyze this resistance literature? Number one, the socio-political activity. Okay, so certain socio-political activity. trying to dominate or bringing in some dominant ideology, some ideals, okay, against where people are not able to accept it. Okay, so through that you can analyze. Second, gender-based oppression. So it is not only the women but also male. So male and female struggling or suffering or being oppressed. Now, these are the literary areas where you have to analyze in a work of art, where you can find these areas of resistance. If you are planning to do your research, okay, then you can use check out on these literary studies where you can do your research on resistance literature. Then liberation struggles. Okay, so liberation struggles, that is freedom. Okay, fighting for freedom, liberation movements forms, especially the marginalized, the low community, the downtrodden, etc. So how these people struggle and they try to resist. Writing in exile. Writing in exile is where, when the writer's work, when he writes something against the government and the government gives him a punishment, trying to exile him to a different country. So what happens? He is exiled till he comes back to his own country. So from a different country, he writes about, okay, he tries to resist. Challenging certain norms, okay, certain norms put down by the government, okay, challenging those norms. Then defying culture practices, so certain traditions, when people are going against certain traditions and rules, so trying to defy culture practices, especially people who migrate, okay, they are caught between two cultures. The intercaste marriages, getting married, okay, so all these come under defying culture practices. Especially when women get married and then they go to a foreign country, and how there you find that they are unable to live there, survive there. They have caught between two cultures. You have the clash of cultures, all those things. So these are some of the defined cultural practices. Armed resistance talks about the impact of world wars. Okay, the world wars, the ruling of the officials. Okay, and the impact of war. Then you have governmental and civil change. So again going against the government or the civil changes. Freedom rights. Okay, so fighting for the rights, fighting for the freedom rights. So these are some of the literary studies. Next, feminism, which is almost, the concept that is still going on today. And the feministic aspect, women suffering in a male dominated society or a patriarchal society, and how women, either they want to be independent, they search for an identity, they fight for an identity, all those things. Then you have the women suffrage movement. Women's suffrage movement were women fighting for a right to vote, which started in 1907. Then you have black feminism. Black feminism is a very cruel aspect where you find black women, how they were raped, raped several times, and how they struggle to come out of that torture which they underwent psychologically, how they suffer. Okay, so they try to rebel back. Diasporic literature is also one term, where when you say diaspora, people who are being scattered, people who migrate to different countries, and how they have to struggle on an alien soil. Okay, their freedoms are curbed, and they have to fight for their rights, they have to fight for their job, they have to fight for their living, all those things. So diasporic literature is also one term where you can analyze this concept of resistance literature. Then you have subaltern literature. Usually, subaltern, in a military aspect, subaltern means an inferior officer. So in a military, an inferior officer, how he will be treated by the other officers, where he is not able to voice out. Okay, so subaltern in literature talks about these voiceless people. Okay, and how they are looked down upon as a lower community. That's why you have Gayatri Spivak uses the term, "Can the subaltern speak?" It's a very beautiful essay by Gayatri Spivak, okay, and she talks about why these subalterns cannot speak, why they cannot voice out, okay, because they are considered as very inferior and very low. And even if they rebel back, no one is going to listen to them, okay, and they also have a fear complex where they are not able to rebel back. And most of the subalterns are colonized countries. So they go again, they are not able to go against the colonizers. So you have this concept of subaltern literature. Then you have eco-criticism, which also is an emerging theory, especially on which I did my research, PhD research. And when you say nature, you find nature in all works of art. Especially you have the romantic writers. Okay, in the earlier you had romantic writers like Shelley, Keats, all of them, but they spoke about the aesthetic appreciation of nature. Okay, but eco-criticism talks about the concern towards nature. Okay, how nature was destroyed and what man should do to preserve nature. Okay, and here eco-criticism talks about a statement saying that if man destroys nature, it is man who suffers and it is not nature. So man, in order to save his life, he should protect nature. Okay, so eco-criticism, the eco-critical people who are concerned towards nature, they resist, with us trying to protect nature. Then you have this concept of child labor, with children being raped, okay, and children, how they are psychologically affected by their parents, and how they are not able to grow up in a proper way. So the concept of child labor. Trauma theory is also a new aspect in resistance literature. Trauma theory talks about these people who are oppressed, they try to resist, but because of the oppression, how they are psychologically affected. Okay, like you have the mindscape. Okay, how the mindscape changes, and sometimes they turn out to become criminals, they turn out to become murderers. Okay, and even it leads to an extent, because of the oppression, they even commit suicide. Okay, so it can be a man issue, it can be a man women issue. Okay, it can be a child issue. Okay, so trauma. Okay, trauma talks about how the mind is psychologically affected. Then Dalit literature, which talks about people, especially the Dalits, who are just trying to emerge out, who are trying to just come out of that cage to which they are, and how they struggle, how they suffer. Okay, and they also try to write and rebel back. And this also is a new emerging theory, sorry, emerging literary aspect, which emerged in 1990, transgender literature. And some of our students, no one likes to talk on this topic, transgender literature, but it is a good topic to do your research on. And some of our students are also doing their research on this transgender literature. Especially it is coined as LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. And it talks about the sexuality and gender identity. When the characters are born, they are natural. Okay, they are a man or a woman. Okay, the child, when it's born, it is natural. But as they grow and they come into the contact of the society, they get into such relationships, and it is the society which puts them into such relationship, and they grow as a transgender, and how they are not accepted in their own family. The society does not accept them, and now you have these transgenders trying to write back. Okay, trying to resist back, that they should be considered as a third gender. Okay, we have male, female, and the transgender, and they also need a place, they also need an identity. Okay, so these are some of the areas where you can analyze this concept of resistance literature. There are many, but I have just highlighted on few. Okay, so now I have just taken a few works of art, just to mention this concept of resistance literature. And I have not gone into the hierarchy or a chronological order of the work. Okay, but I have just analyzed few of the works, which can be, when these works were written, they are not called as resistance literature. Okay, but you can bring them under the broader umbrella resistance literature, and you can talk about these works as an example for resistance literature. And the first work which I have chosen is Civil Disobedience, a very beautiful text by Henry David Thoreau, which was published in 1849. And the very title itself, okay, gives you the resistance. Okay, civil disobedience. So he says disobey. That's what he starts the essay with. So he says, disobey the government. He says, if you feel the government is taxing you too much, if they're asking you to pay your taxes or anything like that, you disobey the government. You have the rights to go against the government. And actually, this text criticizes the American social institutions about the Mexican and American War. And even Henry David Thoreau, he was also, taxed. He was also asked to pay the taxes, and he refused. And because of that, he had to spend one night in prison, but he did not care about it. You either you pay the tax for the war or you stay in prison. But he said, I'm ready to stay in prison. Okay, I will go to prison. Okay, that is what his statement is. That so he resists back. He says, I will not pay the taxes. I'll rather be, I'm ready to take the punishment. So that is what Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience talks about. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. It's a very, very old text, and it is prescribed in almost all the educational institutions, where it talks about, the people fighting for their civil and economic rights, and how they walk towards the Washington House, okay, and they, as a group, as a community, and they try to fight for their rights, okay. And Martin Luther very beautifully puts it like, he has a dream. He says, surely my dream will come true, that one day a black child and a white child will hold hands together, okay. And this talks about the theme of racism, okay, and how people were fighting for their rights, okay. One more prose text, okay, the Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, written in 1926 by Langston Hughes. If you read the essay, you will really find it as an emotional appeal to the Negro community. In this essay, even the Negro family, the black family, teaches their child, don't be a black, okay? If you are a black, you will suffer in your life, okay? You be a white, you adopt to the life of the white. You look at the white children and grow up. Even the parents of the Negro community tell their children, okay, don't be a black, okay? You just grow up as a white. So Langston Hughes, he emotionally appeals to his own community in this essay, and he tells them, okay, why do you want to adapt to the white culture? You be as a Negro artist, whatever comes to you, whether good or bad, you try to be a Negro artist. Okay, why do you want to adapt to that white culture? Okay, and he says we can break that racial mountain, because the Negro artists, they are not allowed to become famous, okay, especially you find even when the Negroes artists, the theaters, the plays, they are not accepted by their own community. But if there is any theatrical performance by the white culture, the Negro artists go and watch it, and they go and visit it, but their own community, they don't go, okay. So this is a emotional appeal to his own community, asking them not to adapt to the racial, to the white culture, and to be as a Negro artist. Let them call you as a Negro artist. So these three beautiful essays talk about how people resist back. Animal Farm. I think most of you would have read this novel. It's a very, very beautiful novel. It's also a very humorous novel, and talks about the farm animals, okay, the animals in the farm, and how they rebel against the human farmers, okay. And the different animals there, and how they say they cannot labor, they cannot work, and then they rebel back, okay. And actually, this novel symbolizes the Russia and Soviet Union under the Communist Party rule, following the themes like a capitalist, socialist, fascist, communist, and how the farmers, okay, especially the farmers, how they rebel back to the landowners. So George Orwell's Animal Farm is a very good example. Hard Times by Charles Dickens. This satirizes, the capitalist mill owners, especially the mill owners who try to look down upon the laborers, and who treat the laborers very badly, especially to the character of Thomas Gradgrind. Okay, and how the laborers, to some extent, they are able to undergo the torture, but later on they try to rebel back, and they form their own trade unions, and they demand for wages and salaries and all those things, okay. So that you find in this novel, in Charles Dickens's Hard Times. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck is also a very good novel. How you, especially the farmers there, because of the Great Depression, okay, and the drought, the land is completely dry, and these farmers have all bought or purchased their land by getting some amount from the bank or landowners. So now, when the land is dry, you find they are not unable to repay the money back. So the banks almost they abduct their lands, okay, they seize their lands, okay, and or they have to repay the money back. So you find that most of these farmers they have to give back their land, and they have to migrate. So they who were owners they become migrant farm workers, and they all have to leave their land and they have to go to a different country. And almost all of them they go to California, and how they struggle there in California as migrant farm workers. And they have to see to their wages, and whatever money they get, you find that they are not able to meet their ends. They are not able to even eat a meal a day, okay, and how they struggle over there, and especially their families. It's very pathetic where you find every time there is the funeral, okay, either the grandfather dies or the grandmother dies, because of starvation, because of food, because whatever money they are able to earn, they eat only one meal a day. So every day there is a death in the house, okay. And the very pathetic thing is, wherever as they travel, wherever they find some land, they have to bury the dead people and just move on, okay. So and finally towards end of the novel you find them resisting back. So this has a good example of literature. Next, Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852 by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And this talks about the problem of slavery, especially humans, how they are treated as slaves. They are being bought, okay, and they just considered as some product where people purchase on the market. And and if they are not able to, as slaves, if they don't accept, so they are being cruelly beaten, and they are being sold, okay. So how the people here, especially the poor people, especially through the character of Uncle Tom, and how Uncle Tom is being sold as a slave, okay, and what are the cruel treatments these slaves undergo if they don't agree to the masters. So this is also a very good example. A Raisin in the Sun is a very good example of subaltern literature by Lawrence Ansbury, which was published in 1959. And here he talks about the Youngers family who have a dream to buy a house, and they buy a house, an apartment in a white colony. And what are the problems they undergo there? The white colony, even though they are ready to give the money and buy a house there, but the white colony they resist, okay, they don't agree to these black people coming and staying in the community there. And how the Youngest family have to face, okay, what are the problems they have to face in that white colony. Emperor Jones, which is a play. Raisin in the Sun is also a play. Emperor Jones, a play by Eugene O'Neill, which was published in 1920. And here he talks about the character Brutus Jones, who goes to an island, okay, who stays there in an island, and he starts ruling over the natives, okay, but he starts cruelly treating the natives, and he takes all their money, all their wealth, and he treats them almost like slaves or laborers. And finally, the natives are not able to undergo his torture, and they try to rebel back, and that ends in the killing of Emperor Jones. Mother Courage and their children. I'm not going very much deeper into the story. I'm just highlighting only on a few aspects of each of the examples which I am giving for you. And you have Mother Courage and Her Children, which was published in 1941 by Bertolt Brecht. It talks about the impact of the 30 Years' War, okay, where Mother Courage, along with her, that's why she's called Courage, okay, Mother Courage, along with her three children, and how she survives during the war, how she has to rebel with the soldiers in the war, okay, and finally, you know, she loses all her three children in the war, and even after losing them, still how she recovers and still how she resists back. Okay, so the novel, the play talks about that concept. Coming to Indian literature, where you have Untouchable by Mulkraj Anand. It's a very beautiful novel which talks about the evil of untouchability. Okay, the lower caste untouchables. You know, the untouchables, the very job that they do, especially as sweepers, as toilet cleaners, you know, as dobiwalas, and stitching slippers. Okay, cobblers. Okay, and how they are being humiliated, and especially the higher laundry people, the people who are ironing. In those days, you find the upper class, they had all these people to work for them, and how they had to struggle, how they had to survive for their income. Okay, so Untouchable talks about House for Mr. Biswas, you know, one of the examples of diasporic literature by V.S. Naipaul, and it talks about the character of Biswas. Biswas, whose dream is to build a house of his own, and through a marriage contact, he comes in contact with the Tulasi clan, which is a family of a very high orthodox ideals, and how Biswas is not able to adjust to those ideals, and how he tries to rebel back. Okay, that you have that concept there. Coromandel Fishers. It's a poem by Sarojini Naidu. It's a very beautiful poem. Sarojini Naidu, you know, the melody in her poems. Okay, you can just see the flow of music when you read her poems. You know, the poetic elements that she uses, the rhyme scheme that she uses, the rhyming words that she uses. It's so beautiful to read her poems. That is why maybe because of that, I think she was called as a nightingale. And this particular poem actually just talks about the fisher community, okay, the fishermen community. But overall, when you look at the deeper meaning of this poem, she tries to ask the people of India to resist to the Britishers. She says, "This is your country, okay? This is your country. You are the king of this country, and you have to rebel. You have to rebel towards the British. You have to get back your country. Just like you go into the sea, and just like the fishermen go into the sea and catch fishes, the fishes is their wealth. Okay, so in the same way, she metaphorically tells them, you have to fight back. You have to fight back. It is your country. India is your country. Okay, you have to fight back. That is why the words that she uses, rise brothers rise, row brothers row, okay, which she talks about in that poem. And Karak by Bama, which talks about Dalit literature, talks about the caste oppression within the Catholic Church, and how the narrator in Karak, where she faces a lot of problems under the Christian Catholic Church, which looks upon these the caste oppressions, and how she tries to struggle to come out of that. Okay. Then these two novels represent the transgender culture, especially Confessions of the Fox, which was published in 2018, and Stone Butch Blues, which was published in 1993. Confessions of the Fox by Jody Rosenberg talks about a transgender by name Jack Shepherd, and how he struggles to live in a society, and how people look down upon him. So how Jack Shepherd tries to resist, okay, how he tries to find his own identity, and what are the problems that he faces there. Stone Butch Blues, actually the word butch, okay, here it refers to a female who looks like a male, okay, and by Leslie Feinberg, through the character of Jess Goldberg. Actually, Jess is born as a girl, okay, and but she undergoes a very cruel life where she's so beautiful that every time when men look at her, they start raping her, okay, and finally she ends up becoming a lesbian, okay, and by becoming a lesbian, what happens to her life, how she struggles in a society. So these are the two novels based on the transgender literature. Okay, so those were some of the examples which I would love to give based on how people resist, especially the marginalized people who are downtrodden, people who belong to the low community, and all the different ways of oppression they underwent, and how they resist towards a society. And it may be a personal account of the writer, or it may be the writer wants to show that these are all the oppressions. So the writer here has used literature as a tool to bring out all these concepts of rebellion or rebelling back. Okay, and I would like to end the example of the literary area where you find this concept of resistant literature with a very beautiful poem by Fayaz Ahmad Fayaz. Fayaz Ahmad Fayaz is a Pakistani poet, and he's the author in Urdu and Punjabi. And this is one of his poems. It's a very revolutionary poem against the colonial rule. I'll just read the poem. When I read it itself, you will understand the resistance here. Okay, the refrain that he uses every time to say "speak, speak, speak." Okay, and so he says, "Speak, for your lips are yet free. Speak, for your tongue is still your own, your body yours alone. Speak, your life is still your own. Look into the blacksmith's forge. The flame blazes the iron's red. Locks unfasten open mouthed, every chain link springing wide. Speak, a little time suffices. Before the tongue, the body die. Speak, the truth is still alive. Speak, say what you have to say. A very beautiful concept for this concept of resistant literature, which you are talking about in your international webinar. Okay, so the first stanza where he says, "It is your lips, it is your body, it is your mouth. You have the right to speak. So speak." He says, "Speak whatever you want, you speak." And second, he uses maybe a metaphor or a comparison where he talks about a blacksmith. When a blacksmith tries to break the chain, the more heat he uses in the chain, okay, to break the chain, the more the chain breaks. So the more you protest, the more you try to resist, the more you protest, you can break the rules, you can break the chain. Okay, that's what he says. And the last stanza where he says, don't wait for the 11th hour. Don't wait for time because time is short. Okay, death is there. Okay, so don't wait for the last moment. If you feel there is some truth in what you are resisting about, okay, then to keep the truth of alive, resist back, speak. Okay, so this is a very beautiful poem by Fayaz Ahmad Fayaz, which you can consider it as a part of a type of resistance literature where he says, "Speak for your freedom, speak for your rights." So to conclude, I hope I have done justice in whatever I have said with reference to your webinar, and especially I would like to conclude with Malala Yousafzai, a Pakistani activist who uses her quotes to quote her, "When the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful." That is why the title, "Voice of the Voiceless." So if everyone is silent, if there's one, an initiative, someone speaks, then the others will follow. You have witnessed this, okay, especially when we are in a meeting or in a group and someone wants to ask anything, there is always a question, who will bell the cat? Okay, and if there is one initiative who stands up and talks, immediately the others will follow. Okay, that is what Malala Yousafzai says, that if there is one person who will speak, the others will follow. So to conclude, a role of a writer is to highlight the reality of the society through their writings, making literature as the voice of the voices. No writer is going to write for fun like you have in Shakespeare's time, writing plays for fantasy, imagination, for the audience, for a kind of entertainment, all those things. But there is some reason. Okay, there should be some reason, or there should be some intellectual in what a writer writes. Okay, so if you take every work of art, there is some realistic resource or source behind why did the writer write this novel. What is the purpose of writing this novel? Okay, so every writer has some to try to bring out some views or a message through his novel. So he becomes the voice of the voiceless. So writers have a great responsibility of bringing forth the voices, especially the people who are being marginalized or the people of the deprived community. So thus, resistance literature becomes a tool for many of these people who are being marginalized or oppressed, and they become a voice for the voiceless. So I would like to conclude here. And if you have any questions, you can even put forward. If I'm able to answer you, I can answer you with regarding to whatever I have spoken here. So thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am, we have a question. So if anyone else also have any questions to be asked to ma'am, you can kindly drop it in the chat box. So, ma'am, there is a question from Swati. Can these literary works about resistance change the attitude of people?
Yeah, maybe to some extent. Okay, you can't say it can change every time. Okay, and nowadays, you have to be very careful in writing because your books don't get published. And like you have the movies. Okay, suppose there is some movie which talks about some political aspect and all, and the movie is banned. Okay, and the movie does not come out. So usually writers don't focus much on this concept, but to some extent, if people read it, you can break the chains. Okay, if it reaches in a proper way, I think you can break the chain.
Okay, ma'am, thank you so much. Anybody else have any questions to be asked?
Ma'am,
Yes,
okay, first of all, thank you for a wonderful session.
yes, sir.
And my question is, you mentioned about slave narratives and the Dalit struggle.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you think that trauma have a major role in constructing resistance literature?
Yes, because when people are completely oppressed, okay, especially trauma talks about they're psychologically affected when they undergo such problems. Now, for example, when you read Bama's Kark, she wanted to become a nun, okay, and when you read her work, you will undergo how she underwent the caste oppression, okay, and how she struggled, and finally she gives up her dreams and she tries to come out, okay. So when they undergo such trauma, they try to resist. Okay, and in their resistance, it may be somewhere where they are able to surrender themselves and they try to get back. But if you take about 90%, where I say no, okay, even if people try, especially you take the transgenders and all, when they try to resist, still they are struggling. Because still you have people struggling, still you have the Dalits struggling, still you have the trans. That is why you find their work still they are going on writing. Even though you have the Afro Americans fighting for their rights, still you find the struggle of the. Even today you have Africans writing about their struggle. So they, as they go on writing and writing, they just try to bring out what they feel. But how far does it change? How far does it bring about a change? It is left in the hands of the society, or maybe it's left in the hand of God.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. There is yet another question from Sister Renu. The question is that these days, one of the major group that is suffering a lot of injustices is the aged or the
Yeah,
old
yeah.
age people.
Old age.
So, can researches be done in such topics?
Now, recently there is a study on disability studies. I think I have not brought in the talking about these people who are being disabled, and disabled studies. People are writing about them when the disabled when they are disabled, and how they are struggling. Okay, and still, even though they are being disabled, that but somehow they try to survive in the society. And if there are writers who are talking about this aged home or people, but still you have this aged home and people, the old age suffering. But as far as what I have come across many novels, but I don't find this concept of people talking about these old age people suffering or struggling. And maybe it's just only a kind of a minor part where you find much of the novels, but mostly we don't find these dominant themes of talking about the old age people and all. Okay, so if there is anyone who's trying to bring about the concept of, you have talking about migration, talking about diaspora, talking about Indians struggling in an alien land, you find a lot of things like that. But about this age old people and about their struggle, I think so far it is not brought into the highlight of the society. If it is brought, surely there will be a a freedom for them. Okay, surely people will consider them also in a better way.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. Anybody else? So, okay, ma'am. So I think they're done with the questions. So we are really fortunate, ma'am, to have you here for this evening, and it was a great pleasure listening to you. Thank you
Thank you.
for your insightful presentation, and you portrayed a broad picture of the historical development of resistance, and I'm sure that your remarks have triggered new ideas that is surely beneficial for us in understanding the various aspects of the topic. So thank you so much, ma'am, for
Okay,
your
thank you.
presence.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your sweet words. Okay, and Father, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be a resource person after a long time.
Yeah.
After COVID, and and you also made me work also, because I was resistance literature was, even though I knew something, but it was a little different topic. Okay, it was a new topic for me also, and I also had to work on it. So you really was an eye opener for me with regard to this topic, because I had to search for many works of whether it is apt to that topic of your webinar. And I thank you so much for that. And I also thank the management, the principal, the head of the department, and your colleagues also for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Father.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. It was we are very privileged to have your presence for this international webinar, because in today's presentation, especially about this webinar as a literature of resistance, that's the topic of our webinar, and you spoke about in detail. You have given a comprehensive idea about the resistance literature. You are speaking about the time, origin, and the main figures in resistance literature, then about the different aspects, branches, and with the help of certain works you explained in detail. So in that way, we also got an overall comprehensive idea about the resistance literature. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Father, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Susan, ma'am, and Sabin, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, Father, I'll take leave.
Yeah.
I'll just leave. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
That was indeed an enriching session for us. Now we have a paper presentation. So may I invite Annette Sebastian for the presentation?
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. Um, I
Hello?
think, yes, yes, you're audible. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So, good evening,